der 16. Dezember 1944. 5:30 hours. The Losheim Gap, Ardennes Forest. Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper stands in the turret of his command vehicle, staring into the freezing mist. The world is silent, save for the low, rhythmic idle of Maybach engines warming up in the pre-dawn dark. Behind him stretches a column of steel that represents the absolute pinnacle of German military engineering. Peiper is not just a commander, he is the tip of the spear for Hitler's last gamble, Operation Wacht am Rhein. His mission is simple but insane. Punch through the American lines, cross the Meuse River, and capture the port of Antwerp. To do this, he has been given the ultimate weapon, the King Tiger. Peiper looks at the tank next to him. It is not a machine, it is a moving fortress. Weighing in at nearly 70 tons, it is the heaviest tank to ever see combat in World War II. Its frontal armor is 150 millimeters thick and sloped a wall of hardened steel that no Allied gun can penetrate. Not the American 76 millimeters, not the British 17-pounder. Physics is entirely on his side. Mounted on this chassis is the 88 millimeters KWK 43 liters 71 gun. It is a weapon of terrifying precision. It can kill a Sherman tank from 2.5 kilometers away, long before the American crew even knows they are in a battle. In a duel, the King Tiger is invincible. It is the apex predator of the battlefield. Peiper checks his watch. He feels a surge of confidence. The intelligence reports tell him the Americans opposite him are green troops, exhausted and ill-equipped. They have thin-skinned Shermans and M10 tank destroyers. Against his King Tigers, they are obsolete. He believes in the tech superiority doctrine. The logic is seductive. If I have a tank that cannot be killed and a gun that kills everything, I cannot lose. He imagines his 70-ton monsters rolling over the American lines like an iron wave. He sees the panic in the enemy's eyes when their shells bounce harmlessly off the Tiger's glacis plate. But Peiper is ignoring the system. He is focused on the weapon, not the war. Deep inside the hull of the lead King Tiger, the driver is already sweating. He is not thinking about the 88 millimeters gun or the glory of the Reich. He is looking at the fuel gauge. A King Tiger consumes 500 gallons of fuel for every 100 miles. In off-road combat conditions, that consumption doubles. It is a beast with an unquenchable thirst. And right now, the German Reich is bleeding dry. Peiper's column has only enough fuel for 150 kilometers. The plan relies on capturing American fuel dumps. It is a strategy built on hope, not logistics. Furthermore, Peiper is looking at the map, but he isn't seeing the terrain. The Ardennes is a network of narrow, winding roads, ancient stone bridges, and soft, muddy ground. The King Tiger is 3.7 meters wide. The average road in the Ardennes is 3 meters wide. Peiper has brought a sledgehammer to perform heart surgery. He has 70-ton tanks on roads designed for horse carts. He assumes that the sheer power of the engine can overcome the laws of geography. He thinks the invincible armor makes him safe. He does not realize that his greatest enemy is not the Americans. It is not the Sherman tank. It is the mud. It is the bridge weight limits. It is the fuel consumption rate. The order comes. Panzer Marsch. The engines roar. The ground trembles. The smell of raw gasoline and exhaust fills the air. The tracks, each link weighing as much as a man, begin to churn the frozen earth. The King Tigers lurch forward. For the first hour, everything seems perfect. The American forward outposts are overrun. The sight of the massive tanks sends terror through the enemy ranks. Peiper smiles. The invincible legend is holding true, but he has exactly 60 minutes before the reality of the system catches up with the fantasy of the weapon. He is about to learn that a 70-ton tank that cannot move is not a weapon. It is just the world's most expensive statue. And the clock is ticking. The first hour passes, and the illusion of speed shatters against the reality of geometry. The Ardennes is not the open Russian steppe, where a panzer division can spread out in a keel wedge formation and dominate the landscape. Here, the war is confined to narrow ribbons of asphalt and cobblestone, winding through dense forests and steep valleys. Peiper quickly realizes that his 70-ton monsters are not behaving like cavalry. They are behaving like a cork in a bottle. The King Tiger is simply too big for the world it is trying to conquer. As the column pushes deeper into the Losheim Gap, the roads become icy traps. A King Tiger's tracks are designed to distribute weight, but on narrow, cambered roads covered in black ice, the massive tanks begin to slide. A 70-ton vehicle, sliding sideways, is not a machine under control. It is a landslide of steel. Drivers fight with the steering levers, sweating in the freezing cold, terrified of sliding into a ditch. If a King Tiger slides off the road here, there is no recovery vehicle in the German army powerful enough to pull it out quickly. One slip, and a million-mark weapon becomes a permanent part of the landscape. Then, the friction of war begins to accumulate. The sheer width of the King Tiger becomes a logistical nightmare. In the villages, the tanks are so wide that they scrape the sides of stone houses, tearing off gutters and crushing garden walls. The column has to slow down to a crawl to navigate tight corners. The legendary blitzkrieg speed drops to 5 kilometers per hour, and this is where the math of the convoy turns deadly. When the lead tank slows down to negotiate a turn, the tank behind it must stop. The tank behind that one must stop. The ripple effect travels down the line, turning a striking force into a stationary traffic jam that stretches for miles. Peiper, standing in his command vehicle, watches his timeline disintegrate. He is fighting the clock, but his army is fighting physics. Every minute the engines sit idling, waiting for the tank ahead to move. They are burning precious fuel. The Maybach HL 230 engine is a masterpiece of power, but it is also a fuel-guzzling beast, even at idle. The needle on the fuel gauge is dropping, not because they are fighting, but because they are waiting. They are burning their lifeline just to keep the heaters running and the engines warm. And then, they reach the bridges. This is the moment where the strategic genius of the German High Command collides with the hard reality of civil engineering. The bridges in this part of Belgium were built for farm trucks and horse carts, not for 70-ton behemoths. Every time the column approaches a stream or a ravine, the engineers have to rush forward. They have to measure, calculate, and pray. Can this stone arch hold the weight? If they are wrong, the tank falls into the river, blocking the only road for the entire division. The Americans, realizing they cannot penetrate the King Tiger's armor, switch tactics. They stop shooting at the tanks and start shooting at the map. American combat engineers, armed with nothing more than explosives and fuses, begin to drop bridges all along Peiper's route. They are not trying to kill the predator, they are destroying its path. Peiper finds himself constantly diverting, searching for side roads, looking for any way across the icy rivers. Each detour adds kilometers. Each kilometer consumes gallons. The invincible King Tiger is being defeated not by a better gun, but by a blown-up bridge and a detour sign. The most powerful weapon on Earth is being rendered useless by the lack of a road to drive on. As Peiper's column grinds its way into the Belgian towns of Stavelot and Staumont, the invincibility of the King Tiger faces a new, humiliating test: architecture. In the open fields of Russia, the 88mm gun was a sniper rifle, a weapon that could dominate miles of terrain. Here, in the narrow, twisting streets of a medieval town, it is a liability. The barrel of the KBUK-43 is over 6 meters long. It overhangs the front of the tank, significantly. When a King Tiger tries to turn a sharp corner in these tight villages, the barrel sweeps across the street like a steel scythe. But if the street is too narrow, the barrel hits the buildings. The driver has to stop. The turret commander has to rotate the gun to the rear just to navigate a turn. In the middle of a combat zone, this maneuver is a death sentence. A tank that has to turn its main weapon away from the enemy just to drive around a corner is not a predator. It is a target. The German crews find themselves fighting their own machine. The very length that gives the gun its terrifying velocity and range is now the precise mechanical flaw that prevents them from shooting at American defenders just 10 meters away. The weapon is too long for the war it is fighting. The Americans, adaptable and pragmatic, learn fast. They know they cannot penetrate the frontal armor of the Tiger II, so they stop trying. They stop playing the game by German rules. Instead of engaging in suicidal tank duels, American infantry teams armed with bazookas wait in the upper stories of stone houses. They wait for the King Tiger to rumble past, its massive engine drowning out the sound of their movement. They wait for the rear of the tank, the engine deck, to pass below their window. The armor there is thin, designed to protect against shrapnel and rain, not a shaped charge delivered from above. A 70-ton tank can survive a hit from a high-velocity anti-tank round on its front plate, but a $50 rocket fired by a farm boy from Iowa into the engine vents can turn it into a burning coffin in seconds. Peiper watches as the urban environment turns his impregnable formation into a vulnerable, sluggish procession. The system of the town, the bricks, the corners, the verticality, is dismantling the weapon. The technological superiority of the German steel is being nullified by the tactical geometry of the American infantry. Furthermore, the American tank destroyers, the M10S and M18S, refuse to joust. They use their superior speed to race to the flanks. They target the tracks. A King Tiger with a broken track is, for all tactical purposes, dead. It cannot be towed by anything less than 2 other recovery vehicles, which Peiper does not have. It cannot be repaired under heavy fire. The crew has to abandon it. Peiper sees his precious reserves of armor dwindling, not because they are being blown up in cinematic explosions, but because they are being immobilized. A mobility kill is just as effective as a catastrophic kill in a war of movement. Then comes the most critical resource failure. The German fuel trucks, struggling to keep up through the mud and the traffic jams caused by the tanks themselves, fall miles behind. The lead tanks are now running on fumes. Peiper captures a small American fuel dump, but it is not enough. He needs a river of gasoline, and he is only finding cups. The needle on the dashboard becomes more terrifying than any Allied gun. The engines begin to sputter. The massive beasts, capable of dominating any battlefield, are about to be defeated by an empty tank. For the first few days of the offensive, Peiper had one ally more powerful than his tanks: the weather. The low, heavy mist of the Ardennes had grounded the Allied air forces, wrapping the German column in a blanket of invisibility. As long as the fog held, the King Tiger was the master of the ground. But on December 23rd, the Christmas miracle occurred not for the Germans, but for the Americans. The high-pressure system moved in, the wind shifted, and the sky turned a brilliant, terrifying blue. Peiper looks up and realizes that his invincibility has just evaporated with the mist. The sound begins as a distant drone, rapidly growing into a screaming roar. The Allied tactical air forces have arrived. P-47 Thunderbolts and Hawker Typhoons descend like vultures. This introduces a variable that the designers of the King Tiger could not engineer away: air supremacy. The King Tiger was built to fight other tanks on a 2D plane. It was never designed to fight a war in 3 dimensions. The German soldiers call them Jabos, short for Jagdbomber. To the tank crews, they are the hand of death. A King Tiger's frontal armor is 150 millimeters thick, but its roof armor is barely 40 millimeters. It is designed to stop a shell from the front, not a 500-pound bomb or a high-velocity rocket from above. The pilots don't even need to score a direct hit on the tank to kill it. They simply target the soft underbelly of the division, the trucks. This is where the system completely collapses. A panzer division is an organism. The tanks are the teeth, but the trucks are the blood. The Allied pilots ignore the steel monsters and strafe the unarmored Opel Blitz trucks carrying fuel and ammunition. In minutes, the road is turned into a river of fire. The burning trucks block the narrow road, trapping the King Tigers in a cage of wreckage. The drivers try to maneuver, but there is nowhere to go. To the left is a cliff. To the right is a dense forest. Ahead and behind are walls of flame. Peiper watches as his technological marvels are reduced to sitting ducks. The 88mm gun, the most feared weapon on the ground, is useless against an aircraft moving at 400 miles per hour. The crews batten down the hatches and wait, listening to the shrapnel rain down on the steel hulls. They are safe inside, but they are impotent. The psychological impact is devastating. The feeling of dominance is replaced by a feeling of absolute helplessness. They are the most powerful warriors on Earth, yet they are hiding in their machines like frightened children during a thunderstorm. The destruction of the support vehicles means that even if the tanks survive the air attack, they are doomed. The spare parts are gone. The mechanics are dead. The ammunition is exploding in the back of a burning truck. The invincible King Tiger is now a solitary beast, cut off from the herd, starving and alone. The tactical genius of the German offensive is being dismantled, not by strategy, but by the sheer industrial weight of the Allied air forces, which can sortie thousands of planes for every single tank Germany can put in the field. By Christmas Eve, the spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division has been blunted, broken, and surrounded in the village of La Glaise. Obersturmbannführer Peiper sits in the basement of a farmhouse, listening to the artillery pound the ruins above. Outside, his magnificent King Tigers are parked in defensive positions. They are still terrifying to look at. Their armor is still impenetrable. Their guns are still lethal, but they are silent. The fuel gauges are reading empty. The invincible King Tiger has a fatal metabolic flaw. It cannot hibernate. It needs to consume to live. Without gasoline, the The hydraulic turret traverse doesn't work. The radio doesn't work. The heater doesn't work. The 70-ton Predator has become a 70-ton bunker, immobile and freezing. The system has completely failed the weapon. Peiper looks at his map one last time. He realizes that he has not been defeated by General Patton or Field Marshal Montgomery. He has been defeated by the supply officer in Berlin, who couldn't get fuel trucks through the bombed-out rail network. He has been defeated by the combat engineer in the US Army, who blew up a bridge 3 days ago. He has been defeated by the mud of the Ardennes. The order is given: destroy the vehicles, break out on foot. This is the ultimate humiliation for a panzer commander. The crews, men who have treated these tanks like living beasts, who have trusted their lives to the thick steel, now have to murder their own machines. They set charges in the breeches of the 88mm guns. They drain the last drops of oil onto the engine blocks and throw in grenades. One by one, the King Tigers commit suicide. The explosions are hollow and mournful. The Americans on the surrounding hills watch in confusion. They aren't firing, yet the German tanks are burning. The crews climb out, not as conquerors, but as infantrymen, stripping off their distinctive black Panzer uniforms to blend in with the darkness. They leave behind 117,000 Reichsmarks worth of equipment per tank. They leave behind the symbol of German technical superiority. As Peiper leads his remaining men into the freezing woods, leaving the burning hulks of L'Église behind, the lesson is complete. The King Tiger was a masterpiece of tactical engineering, but a failure of strategic engineering. It was built for a war that Germany was no longer fighting a war of duels and open fields. In the war of logistics, bridges, and fuel, it was a dinosaur. The German general had his hour of understanding. He realized that in modern industrial warfare, there is no such thing as an invincible weapon. There are only sustainable systems. And on that cold December night, the simple, mass-produced, thin-skinned Sherman tank was the winner. Not because it was better, but because it was there. It was running, and it had gas in the tank. The King Tiger, the king of the battlefield, was left to rust, a monument to the arrogance of prioritizing firepower over mobility. The statue was finally still. Christmas Day, 1944. The guns around L'Église have finally fallen silent. The smoke has cleared, revealing a surreal graveyard of steel. American troops from the 30th Infantry Division move cautiously into the village. They expect to find a fortress of resistance, but instead, they find a museum of abandoned giants. The King Tigers are there, sitting in the snow, their 88mm guns pointing menacingly at the horizon. But they are dead, not killed by enemy fire, but killed by their own thirst. Soon after the infantry secures the area, a different kind of soldier arrives. These are the technical intelligence teams from the US Army Ordnance Department. They are not there to fight. They are there to perform an autopsy on the enemy's technology. They climb over the hulls of the 70-ton beasts, opening hatches, inspecting engines, and examining the controls. What they find inside shocks them, not because of its brilliance, but because of its madness. They discover that the King Tiger is a masterpiece of craftsmanship. The welds are perfect. The optics are ground to the precision of a telescope. The engine components fit together with the tightness of a Swiss watch. But to the American engineers, who grew up in the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh, this is not engineering genius. It is an industrial crime. They realize that the Germans were building Ferraris to drive in a demolition derby. The artisan's trap becomes painfully obvious. The Americans find the transmission system of the King Tiger. It is a complex, hydraulic marvel designed to steer a 70-ton vehicle with the touch of a finger. But it is so complex that it requires a team of specialized mechanics to repair. In the field, under fire, in the mud, it is a nightmare. A broken seal, a snapped line, and the tank is useless. The Americans look at their own Sherman tanks parked nearby. The Sherman is rough. It rattles. It is welded together by teenagers in factories who had never seen a tank 6 months ago. But if a Sherman transmission breaks, you can swap it out in a field in 4 hours. If a King Tiger transmission breaks, you have to ship the tank back to Germany. This autopsy reveals the fundamental disconnect in the German mind. They believed that the battlefield was a place for duels between superior machines. They designed the King Tiger to win that duel. But the American engineers realized that the tank is just one part of a chain. The King Tiger was designed in a vacuum, ignoring the reality of maintenance, repair, and recovery. It was over-engineered to the point of fragility. As the intelligence officers write their reports, a profound realization settles in. The 69-ton weight wasn't just a number, it was a sentence. They find manuals inside the tanks, strictly forbidding drivers from crossing certain types of bridges. They find logs complaining about the final drives shattering under the torque. The Americans realized that the King Tiger was fighting two enemies, the Allies and itself. Every mile it drove was a gamble against its own mechanical complexity. The abandoned tanks at Laglaise become a symbol of a failed philosophy. The Germans focused on peak performance, the biggest gun, the thickest armor. The Allies focused on peak reliability, the engine that starts every time, the part that is easy to replace, the tank that can cross any bridge. Standing in the snow, next to the silent monsters, the American technicians understand why they are winning. They aren't winning because they are better warriors. They are winning because they are better engineers of logistics. The King Tiger is the ultimate example of a weapon that is too good to be useful. The autopsy of the King Tiger at Laglaise reveals a deeper, darker truth about the German war effort in 1944. It exposes a strategic delusion that started long before the first shot was fired in the Ardennes. The tragedy of the King Tiger did not begin in the snow of Belgium. It began in the factories of Kassel. To understand why the German general lost, we have to look at the math of production. Building a single King Tiger was an act of industrial suicide. It required over 300,000 man-hours of skilled labor. It demanded rare strategic materials like molybdenum and vanadium to harden the steel materials that Germany simply did not have. To build these monsters, the Reich had to cannibalize its own economy. They were not building weapons, they were building cathedrals of steel. Each tank was a unique masterpiece, hand-finished, often with parts that weren't even fully interchangeable with the tank next to it on the assembly line. Contrast this with the American approach. Across the Atlantic, in the Detroit Arsenal, the Americans were not building masterpieces, they were building Fords. The M4 Sherman was designed to be good enough. It was designed to be welded together by a teenager who had been a farmhand 2 weeks ago. It was designed to fit on a standard railway flat car. It was designed to be shipped across an ocean. The Americans understood that, in a war of attrition, quantity has a quality all its own. The German general believed in the concept of the force multiplier, the idea that one King Tiger was worth 10 Shermans. Tactically, on paper, this was true. The kill ratios proved it. But strategically, it was a fallacy. If it takes you 10 times as long to build a tank, and 10 times as much fuel to run it, and 10 times the logistical effort to move it, you haven't created a force multiplier. You have created a force divider. You have concentrated all your national resources into a few fragile baskets. This obsession with the wonder weapon blinded the German high command to the reality of the battlefield. They thought that if they just made the armor thicker and the gun bigger, they could stop the Allied tide. But they forgot that a tank is only as effective as the crew inside it. The complexity of the King Tiger meant that it required elite, highly trained crews to operate effectively. A driver had to know exactly how to feather the throttle to prevent the transmission from stripping. A gunner had to understand the complex optics. By late 1944, Germany had run out of elite crews. They were putting boys with only a few weeks of training into the most complex land weapon ever built. The result was predictable. In the Ardennes, many King Tigers were abandoned, not because they were destroyed, and not even because they ran out of fuel, but because inexperienced drivers burned out the engines or slid them into ditches. The machine demanded a level of competence that the dying Reich could no longer provide. The system of human resources had collapsed, rendering the weapon useless. The King Tiger stands as the ultimate symbol of the German failure to understand the nature of modern war. They were fighting a romantic war of knights and duels, while the Allies were fighting a corporate war of supply chains and production quotas. The German general looked at the battlefield and saw targets. The Allied general looked at the battlefield and saw a spreadsheet, and in the end, the spreadsheet always wins. The King Tiger was a magnificent failure, a terrifying beast that starved to death because its creators built it too big for the world it lived in. Inside the freezing hulls of the stalled King Tigers, a different kind of breakdown is occurring. It is not mechanical, it is psychological. For years, the crews of the Waffen SS had been fed a diet of propaganda. They were told they were the elite, the Übermensch, and that their weapons were the hammer of Thor. They believed that superior will and superior steel would always defeat the decadent armies of the West. But sitting in a 70-ton tank that refuses to move, shivering in the Belgian winter, that belief shatters. The King Tiger, once their protector, begins to feel like a tomb. Without fuel to run the engine, there is no heat. The steel hull sucks the warmth out of their bodies. The condensation freezes on the inside of the vision blocks. The crew realizes a terrifying truth. The armor that keeps the enemy out also keeps them in. They are sitting in a highly conspicuous steel box that is attracting every artillery shell in the sector. And the artillery is relentless. This is the other side of the industrial war equation. The American artillery does not fire sporadically. They use a technique called time on target, coordinating battalions of guns to land their shells at the exact same second. For the German crews, it feels like the sky is falling. They are safe inside the Tiger's thick hide from the shrapnel, but the concussion is maddening. It is a constant, rhythmic hammering that breaks the nerves. They realize that the Americans are willing to fire $10,000 worth of ammunition just to pin down one tank. The enemy has resources to waste. The Germans do not even have fuel to retreat. This creates a crisis of identity. A tanker without a tank is just an infantryman with a pistol, and a poorly equipped one at that. When the order comes to abandon the vehicle, it is not just a tactical withdrawal. It is an admission that their entire philosophy of war has failed. They have to destroy their own god. They pack explosives into the breech of the 88mm gun, the gun that was supposed to win the war, and detonate it. The sound of a King Tiger destroying itself is distinct. It is a dull, internal thud, followed by the clatter of internal machinery collapsing. It is the sound of a nation swallowing its pride. As the crews climb out of the hatches, they leave behind not just a machine, but a mindset. They step out of the invincible weapon and into the mud, becoming vulnerable human beings again. They look back at the smoking hulks. The King Tigers look almost peaceful now, stripped of their purpose. They are no longer weapons of war. They are just 70 tons of scrap metal that will never move again. The crews realize that they were betrayed by their own designers. They were given a weapon that demanded perfect conditions to operate, in a war where conditions were never perfect. They were given a thoroughbred racehorse to pull a plow through a swamp. The walk back to the German lines is a walk of disillusionment. They pass American equipment on the way, abandoned jeeps, trucks, even Shermans. They notice something disturbing. The American equipment is simple. It looks mass-produced. It lacks the elegance of the Tiger. But there is so much of it. Everywhere they look, there is evidence of a society that treats machines as disposable tools, not as irreplaceable idols. The German soldier realizes that he is fighting a war against a factory that never sleeps, while he is serving a factory that can barely keep the lights on. In the months following the disaster in the Ardennes, a quiet revolution took place in the design bureaus of the world. The King Tiger had been intended to be a weapon of the future, but in reality, it was the last dinosaur of a dying era. Military strategists in Washington, London, and Moscow looked at the rusting hulks in Belgium and came to the same conclusion. The era of the heavy tank was over. The King Tiger had proved that there is a hard limit to how big a land vehicle can be before it becomes a liability to its own army. The German general had bet everything on specialization. He wanted a tank that could win any duel, but the war proved that duels are irrelevant. What matters is operational mobility, the ability to move an army across a continent, not just across a field. The King Tiger was an evolutionary dead end. It was too heavy for bridges, too wide for trains, and too thirsty for supply lines. It was a weapon designed for a static war that no longer existed. From the ashes of this failure, a new concept was born, the main battle tank, MBT. The victors of World War II realized they didn't need a light tank for speed and a heavy tank for armor. They needed a universal tank that balanced firepower, mobility, and protection. They needed a tank that could kill a tiger, but could still cross a bridge. This realization would lead to the legendary Cold War tanks like the Centurion, the Patton, and the T-54. These machines were the direct answer to the failure of the King Tiger. They were designed to be reliable, maintainable, and logistically sustainable. The tragedy for the German general was that he realized this too late. He had spent the entire war chasing the ghost of invincibility. He pushed his engineers to add more armor, bigger guns, and more complex engines, thinking that technology could overcome the lack of resources. He didn't understand that he was fighting a war against the laws of physics. Every kilogram of armor he added increased the ground pressure. Every millimeter of gun caliber he added increased the reload time and the size of the turret. He created a weapon that was mathematically perfect, but operationally impossible. As the Allied armies pushed into the German heartland in 1945, they passed trainloads of King Tigers sitting on sidings, brand new, never fired. They had no fuel to reach the front. They were essentially steel statues, monuments to a flawed strategy. The German general watched as his wonder weapons were captured by troops driving simple trucks and mass-produced medium tanks. It was the ultimate irony. The superior weapon was defeated by the average weapon, simply because the average weapon actually showed up to the fight. This was the final lesson of the King Tiger. In the harsh calculus of total war, perfect is the enemy of good enough. The Germans strove for perfection and achieved paralysis. The Allies settled for adequacy and achieved victory. The King Tiger remains in history books as the most fearsome tank of World War II. But to the strategists, it is a cautionary tale. It is a reminder that in war, a weapon that cannot move is not a threat. It is just a target waiting to be claimed. Today, the King Tiger sits in museums around the world, in Bovington, in Saumur, in Munster. Visitors stand before them in awe, marveling at the thickness of the steel and the length of the barrel. They look at the specifications card: 69 tons, 88 millimeters gun, 150 millimeters armor. On paper, it is still the undisputed king. It wins every argument in the realm of top trumps. But the history books tell a different story. They tell the story of a weapon that won every duel but lost the war. The German general wanted a champion. He wanted a gladiator that could stand in the arena and defeat any challenger. And he succeeded. He built the ultimate gladiator. But the Allies weren't fighting a gladiatorial contest. They were fighting a war of mobilization. While the German engineers were arguing about how to make the transmission handle 70 tons of stress, the American engineers were figuring out how to ship 50,000 gallons of gasoline across the Atlantic every single day. One side was obsessed with the sword. The other was obsessed with the arm that swings it. The tragedy of the King Tiger is the tragedy of the Third Reich itself. It was a regime that believed willpower and technology could overcome reality. They believed that if a weapon was scary enough, strong enough, and advanced enough, the laws of economics and geography would bend to accommodate it. They were wrong. The mud of the Ardennes did not care about the superior Aryan engineering. The bridges of Belgium did not care about the Führer's orders. Gravity and friction are the only true neutral parties in war, and they voted against the King Tiger. So, as we look back at the Battle of the Bulge, we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question about the nature of power. What is true strength? Is it the ability to take a hit without flinching? Or is it the ability to keep moving when the world is falling apart? The King Tiger was a diamond, hard, brilliant, and precious. The Sherman was a brick, cheap, rough, and common. But you cannot build a wall with diamonds. You build walls with bricks. And in 1944, the Allies built a wall of steel that rolled all the way to Berlin, rolling right past the abandoned, rusted carcasses of the invincible King Tigers. The lesson for the modern military mind is clear. Amateurs talk about tactics and firepower. Professionals talk about logistics and sustainability. The most dangerous tank in the world is not the one with the biggest gun. It is the one that has fuel in the tank, a bridge it can cross, and a crew that isn't afraid to drive it. The King Tiger remains a warning from the past. Be careful that in your quest for the ultimate weapon, you don't build a statue that marks your own grave. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the systems of war, rather than just the hardware, make sure to like and subscribe. We don't just look at the specs, we look at the reality. Tell us in the comments, if you were a commander in 1944, would you choose one King Tiger or 10 Shermans? Would you choose the invincible statue or the winning machine? The choice is yours. This is the analysis of history, declassified.